Welcome to the Nuclear Snell channel. This episode is gonna be about distressing black fabric and gear items. Kind of answered this question in the past, but I figured I'll just make it a separate video because it's such an often asked question. A lot of base items that we find that we want to work from are black. They can be used nicely if you know how to work with them. The reason why you might have heard the advice of avoiding black if you're a newbie from a lot of people, probably myself included, is that it is a bit tricky to work with, but that's all it is. A bit tricky, not a lot. And I'm just gonna show you how I would go about distressing black gear items right here. And after that you will hopefully have a thorough understanding of that. We start like with anything else. I don't know if you've seen my video about this tool or not, but we start like with any other fabric with mechanical distressing. And I'm not wearing my thick protective glove right now. I usually would, not to scratch myself by accident. I'm just gonna be really careful here. So I start out by introducing some holes, and you can see that it works immediately. Right, we have some nice holes going on here. I will also go along the borders. We just continue like this, giving it some wear and tear. I love this tool because it does so really quickly. And I'm just gonna do one side here. If I wanted to attach this to something with this side facing my costume, I would not even bother distressing this. If it's a standalone item, then yes, I would distress both sides. But in this case, I'm just gonna stick to this side right here. So what you don't want to do is accidentally tear two large holes into some sections of it that are gonna be getting a lot of functional use. And also watch out for seams, not to rip through those. Basically anything that would destroy the functionality of this thing entirely. I want to give either just a gentle tap with this or just avoid altogether. So once we have something that looks like this, we can continue with fabric paint. And I'm gonna glove up here, not to have my hands covered in paint. We will of course use white, and we will of course use some sand colored mix here. As you see, it's pretty runny. I don't know how good you can see it on the camera because it's all super bright here. I've turned the brightness up on the camera so you can see the black better. So I'm just gonna spread it on my gloved hands, and then I'm just gonna be touching this thing and wiping my hands off on it, and not just from the front but also from the sides, and I'll rub it in. I'll basically use it as sort of a rag, and you can see immediately that already after this first pass we're starting to get some brighter highlights. Now, a problem that a lot of people face when working with black fabric is especially like Cordura or some other military fabrics, like if you have a black tactical vest or whatever. The paint just soaks into it a lot of times. But we can counteract this by a sheer amount of paint or by using thicker paint. I will show that to you in a sec. So I'm just gonna repeat the whole process again. Notice that at first it's gonna look like there is too much paint at parts of it, and I will leave it like this for a sec and it will soak in just a bit after we've done that. So what this does is effectively, well, kind of a dry brushing technique, if you will, except your hands are the brush. This, of course, can also be done with a brush. It can be done with a sponge. But in this case, I was just like, okay, my hands will do just fine for this. If I have a bigger thing, I will put my paint on a sponge and go with the sponge because it can save up a lot more paint inside of it than just my hands. Having done this 2 times, we are already getting a very nice effect here. Now let's just go ahead and apply our sand colored mix. This is something that I've mixed from multiple different tones of fabric paint. It was red, yellow, and a bit of black to get me to this. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna apply it not just on the front but also on the sides. Very important. And here we are. Now this is starting to look like a really nicely distressed piece of black kit. And seeing this somewhere on a post-apocalyptic festival or LARP would make me happy. It also doesn't really necessarily need to be more than this. We will also apply a bit dust to it, but it doesn't really need to. So this is just fine. The reason you might have heard the advice of not using black at all is because if you're a complete noob and if you haven't seen this tutorial or figured it out on your own, you will end up just with, you know, straight black, and that just looks completely new, like it's from the store. Whether or not it would realistically distress like this or not is a different question. You can see also right here, this is not really entirely black, it's kind of sun-bleached a bit, but this still doesn't look very distressed, let's face it. This looks absolutely blasted. So with this simple trick, you can work with black. You can do it to your black jeans, you can do it to your tactical gear, whatever. Now, I've promised to talk about thicker paint, I think. So here we have a different brand of fabric paint, which happens to be a lot thicker. This doesn't flow, as you see. And in case you have those fabrics that will just soak it up immediately, you gotta work with them thicker, less soaky paints. Just gonna put it like this on the sponge, and just gonna dry brush it here along this bottom border here, for example. And then I'm gonna quickly follow up with a hairdryer. So what this does is a double whammy, because this thicker paint will not seep into the fabric and dissipate inside of it so quickly, and at the same time, before it even has the chance to do it, you're drying it up with that fan. It's just a cheap hairdryer. That's it. I have actually never done this way, because usually just the paint being thicker and me applying a couple more layers of it usually just does the trick. Now we're gonna apply a stencil to this. This isn't strictly distressing, but you know, I would usually apply stencils to large surfaces like this to just add some more interesting details. So this whole process, I've explained it in a lot more detail in my stencils video. You can find it on my channel if you haven't. So I'm not gonna be going into too much detail here, but just the basics. Make sure the stencil really sticks to the thing, and if you ain't spraying, if you're using a sponge, then it makes a lot of sense to press from above. So don't do this. Press only from above. So this stencil isn't sticking super well because the surface of this is already kind of wet with paint, and also the stencil's adhesive is no longer that fresh. But this will not stop me from just going from above. Careful not to shift it. Just like this. And I'm going all around this. This is going to be a negative stencil. I haven't done many of those in the past, but I do find a liking in them now. They also look kind of cool when the form comes out as a negative surrounded by, you know, paint, and your stencil form is the no paint area. So I'm just gonna go like this. And this is a thick paint. This is super important. If you're gonna go with that runny paint we used before, that ain't gonna work. It will just seep into it. It'll not respect the borders of this stencil. It's not gonna be good. So that's what it looks like now. I think this is pretty cool. Now I'm gonna dry it up a bit with my hair dryer here. Not gonna spend too long doing it. It's alright if it's not entirely dry just yet. What I'm gonna do now is take just a tiny bit of that runny black paint this time that we haven't used before for the basic distressing, but here I'm adding some black paint to the sponge and I'm gonna dab it here and there so that this this white of the stencil is not that super aggressive, and also looks like there has been some use in the time between the stencil being made and now. So this makes it look a lot more realistic, and we are gonna just use the same tiny sponge for this dirt color here and do just the same with it. By the way, now you can also do stuff like this. You know, just swipe across it if you want, but I just prefer still dabbing from above, just like this. So this now looks like this stencil was made, but then the whole bag has seen some use after that, right? The more we add, the more time has passed. And of course, at some point, the stencil just becomes no longer visible. You don't want to go there. But I think this is nice. If you rewind the video and look at it now and before, you might see a difference in just how too fresh and fake that stencil looked before and how acceptable it starts looking now. Now this next step you have seen already in one of my very first videos. It's basically just applying some clear spray paint, and while it's still drying, applying some dust. I'm gonna be using film and theater dust here on top of this. I'm outside right now. You don't want to do this inside, and usually I would also be wearing a mask for this, which I'm gonna put on now. So now I'm gonna use the brush to just remove the excess dust, because whatever didn't stick properly to that paint, I don't want to fall off later. I want it to fall off now. So after it has dried outside for a bit and can be taken inside without stinking up the whole place, although this particular paint that I used wasn't that stinky to begin with. Anyway, you will see it looks like this. And I think this looks fine. It can be left like this. However, one thing that bothers me a bit about this now is that it looks very, very dusty on the surface, and that we don't have anything that kind of looks greasy or dirty on top of that dust layer. Like, there is layers upon layers upon layers here, as you see. So what I'm gonna do now is take a small amount of runny black fabric paint. Yes, we're gonna use the black paint again now. A really small amount. Now this really needs to be controlled. And I'm gonna wipe off my hands on this after that, and I'm gonna really carefully go over some of those tiny threads and corners and whatnot. A bit more on this side than the other. I'm just gonna apply a bit of that black. Wait, this is the sponge where we had our white in it as well. That's why it's getting kind of grayish here, which is also interesting. But let's get a fresh piece of sponge. Alright, let's do this again without the contamination with white paint anymore. And again, we just go over the edges a bit. Not over the whole thing, not everywhere, just, you know, here and there. Maybe you touched some machine parts on your post-apocalyptic adventures, you know, stuff like that. And this now adds the final detail, in my opinion. So I think this looks really cool. And if you also think this looks really cool, then, well, I hope that this video was useful for you and gives you a better idea on how to work with black fabrics for your post-apocalyptic costume. As you can see, it's actually quite easy. So if this video helped you and if you like the channel in general, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It's linked in the video description right below the video. And also join the Nuclear Snail community group on Facebook. And all of that said, have a fantastic day, have fun crafting, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!